All right. Well, it looks like everyone who is in the room is connected to audio, so we'll go ahead and just say welcome to session 3 of our Staff Satisfaction Learning Collaborative. And today we are going to be talking about responding to staff satisfaction surveys. We have a wonderful guest speaker with us today, Tammy Green, and I'll be introducing her in just a minute. All right, so I'm Suzanne Spear. I'm the Senior Director of Workforce Development. We met on session 1 and so glad to be here again with you today. And also with me are Helen Ray Vernier, our training specialist, and Mariah Blake, our Senior Program Associate. And we are here to make, just like I always hear with flight attendants, we're here to make your experience as pleasant and as informative as possible. So we're just really glad that we can be here with you today. Housekeeping items. So yes, as you saw when you came in, the session is being recorded. It's also going to be posted on the discussion board in case you'd like to go back and listen to it or share it with colleagues that didn't get a chance to attend. Feel free to turn on your camera and be as present as possible. We certainly understand Zoom fatigue if you don't care to be on camera, but we also welcome the opportunity to see smiling faces. Use the chat or the chat box or unmute yourself if you'd like. We've got, a relatively small group. And so that's one of the wonderful things about learning collaboratives is we're able to really collaborate and share our thoughts during the session. Feel free to send Mariah an email or a chat in the chat box. Her email is mblake@clinicians.org if you need something technical wise during the session. And please feel free to, or please actually just fill out the evaluation at the end of the session. All right, so the goals of our session. Well, first of all, we would love for you to learn the materials presented from the expert faculty that we've brought in and also each other. Sometimes peer sharing is just as powerful as our subject matter experts, and so we hope you're definitely taking advantage of that. We would like you to share your challenges and strengths and be inquisitive, ask questions, be willing to share your, ups and your downs and all of this experience and, really be as open and honest as possible and really get as much out as you can. And then we would love for you all to develop and implement a strategy for either implementing or responding to staff satisfaction surveys. And along the way, we hope that you are building relationships with the people on your team, the people in the cohort, and the ACU team. All right, so we have all of these methods of learning, and we really hope that you are taking advantage of all of the different modalities that we have in these learning collaboratives, so the live webinars, the chat, the discussion board, all the different assignments, and all of that to really give you a full and rich experience. Okay, so today, what are we going to do today? Well, I gave a little bit of overview that we are going to be talking about responding to staff satisfaction surveys, but to tell you exactly what we're going to be doing, well, first of all, we're going to be doing another icebreaker. We always find those fun and just enjoyable ways to sort of give ourselves a mini brain break. Then we're going to be going into a homework review and reflection session and time. We're going to give you all about 10 minutes to speak to each other about the homework, any roadblocks, anything that you realized or thought about, and share that with your peers. And then we're going to turn it over to Tammy, and she's going to talk specifically about responding to staff satisfaction surveys and some experience that she's had there. And then we'll go into homework and wrap up our session with next steps. All right, so we're going to do an icebreaker, as I mentioned, and you all know from the previous 2 sessions, go ahead and either aim your phone at the QR code or go to menti.com and enter 2544-2931. And again, that's menti.com 2544-2931. Thanks, Helen, for putting that in the chat. And so before we go over there and Helen shares her screen, I just wanted to show you what these either or kind of things look like before we go over there. Okay, so are you a spring or a fall person? I know sometimes it's easy to like the the season that you're in, but are you a spring or a fall person? And then or do you vote for summer or winter? So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and let Helen share the Mentimeter screen so everyone can see what we voted here and what teams we're on, if you will. All right. So it looks like fall. All right, we're fall people here. Almost more than 2 to 1. So I enjoy the fall, but I always feel like it's just fleeting and the days get too short quickly. So anyway, all right, awesome. Looks like everyone's in. All right, so spring or fall. All right, I think fall took it away there. Almost 3 to 1 there. All right, now, are you a summer person or a winter person? I always find this really interesting. All right, neck and neck. Who's going to break the tie? All right, winter's pulling away. I guess the snow outweighs the heat and humidity. Helen and I are both from fairly temperate climates, and we were in Phoenix last week where the weather was 105 a couple weeks ago in late September. So yeah, and some people just like the summer. Okay, neck and neck. Wow. Well, I hope whatever you picked, you were able to enjoy it this past year. And if you like winter, well, good news, it's coming up. All right. So I will continue sharing my screen. Thank you very much, Helen, for that. And for all of you guys for participating in the fun little icebreaker there. All right, so what we're going to do now is we are going to go into a time where we're going to Mariah's going to put everyone into breakout groups, and we're going to do a little small group discussion. So this is really a time to reflect on your homework questions where where you all were asked to put some action plans for implementing staff satisfaction survey. So the first question is, what is one thing you learned by completing this assignment? What is one challenge your team might encounter by implementing a staff satisfaction survey? And number 3 probably applies more than number 2, because I know most of you have done staff satisfaction surveys. But if you have done a staff satisfaction survey before, what is one thing you'll do differently with the survey? So start to think about those as Mariah gets everyone into their breakout groups. And once we have everyone there, we will give you all about 10 minutes. So we'll bring you back probably about 20 after the hour or 21 after the hour. And then we can hand it over to Tammy, and she's going to talk to us about responding to staff satisfaction surveys. So Mariah, how's it going? All right, looks like everyone's going into their breakout rooms. We will see you all in about 10 minutes. And let us know if you need anything or have any questions during your group discussion. All right, looks like Mariah is beaming everyone back into our room. For those of you who are Gen Xers like myself, you will get that reference there. All right, I think everybody's back. Well, I hope that you all enjoyed speaking to your colleagues about a little bit about your experience with your action plans and some things you learned, and also maybe what you might do differently if you've done a survey before, maybe the next time you do it, maybe next year, if you've already done one this year, or if you're just planning on doing another one soon, what you might do differently there. Well, as I mentioned, we are just super excited to have a guest presenter today, and her name is Tammy Green. She is the owner of Tammy Green Consulting. She has been in the FQHC world, if you will, for a while. Before she started her business, Tammy Green Consulting, she was the executive director of Anchorage Neighborhood Health Center in Anchorage, Alaska. And so she's well versed in the FQHC world and just so excited to learn from her wisdom that she's going to share with us today. Before we go into Tammy's presentation, we are going to ask one more question that is going to help Tammy understand a little bit more about where you are with in your process and where you are with the data. So you can go back to that same Mentimeter that you did for the icebreaker session or for the icebreaker questions. And if you've gotten out, it's menti.com 25442931. Helen put it in the chat earlier, so you can go back there or you can use that QR code. And the question is, what do you hope to accomplish with the data from an employee engagement and satisfaction survey? I'm going to stop sharing, and then Helen is going to share the Mentimeter again, and then we are going to get back into presentation. All right. All right, so Tammy, looks like we have some answers coming in. Improve engagement and morale. Create solutions to the things that frustrate our employees. Absolutely. Educate on areas of confusion. Ooh, those are two good points. To be the employer of choice in our area, not just for healthcare. Utilize the information to drive improvements that improve employee engagement, satisfaction, and performance. Trends that help us understand where we need to focus and where we can have the most impact. Yes, we can't do everything, but where can we focus our time and our resources? Actionable feedback that is specific. Yes, we talked about that last time. So asking the questions to get that actionable feedback, where employees feel that they'll be listened to and we took it seriously. We hope to make impactful, positive changes to improve engagement and retention. Yes, impactful for sure. Company growth through implementation of key employee ideas. Yes, absolutely. Employees have some wonderful ideas. We can't implement all of them, but for sure they have great ideas. Identify areas where we can make measurable change to improve our staff experience. Transparency, oh, I like this one, transparency for staff so that they'll feel heard and give honest feedback. That's another really, really big one. Discover areas to focus efforts. Yes, exactly. I've seen focus in two of these, absolutely. Improve satisfaction, improve retention and engagement. Absolutely. Helen, do we have any more? Thank you very much. Identify what we're doing well. Yes, celebrating those wins and what we can improve on and do better to engage staff. Gain, again, that actionable feedback to identify areas where improvements can be made. Yes, awesome. All right, wonderful. Thank you guys so much for that. And with, looks like, Tammy, you're free to go ahead and share the slides and take it away.
Okay, so am I using your slides, right?
Yes.
Okay, I don't see them. Let's see, wait, let me see, hold on. Okay, whoops.
If not, that's okay. We can toggle back at the end.
Let's see. Uh-oh, what did I do here?
And I can see your whole screen, Tammy.
Okay, so I don't want that. Stop sharing. Okay. Okay. Darn. So can you just put the slides up and I can drive them? That's how I thought.
Yep.
Or did you want me to
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
That's perfect.
Absolutely. I can do that. All right. No problem. I can do this one of several ways. Okay. Tammy, I'm going to give you remote control right about.
Okay.
Do you have control? It looks like, yep, there you go. You got it.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Always those little glitches. So thank you guys for inviting me to participate in this learning experience for all of you. This is a subject and an interest of mine that is just deeply passionate. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the learnings I've had and some of the wisdom that's come out of it. So I love this slide to start with, that knowledge becomes wisdom only after it's been put to practical use. And I think sometimes when we talk about data, that we're really good at collecting data, but we're not always great at using it in a way that's practical and meaningful. So I just want to, the way I want to set up this presentation is that there's a lot of information on my slides, and I'm not going to go into detail with every single slide where there's a lot of information. But what I like to do in these kind of presentations is to make sure that I have enough information so that when you get the set of slides, that you can go back and you can really kind of spend some time looking at some of the pieces that might have been of interest to you, and that you don't have to worry about taking all kinds of notes and making sure you get every piece of information. So hopefully there's a lot of information that you'll gather. I just want to quickly give you a little bit of background about myself so you kind of understand where I'm coming from, and that I, even though I'm not in your health center, I've been in the FQHC world for quite some time, and in healthcare in general for many years. But prior to launching my business last year, I'd been the CEO of Anchorage Neighborhood Health Center, like Suzanne had said, for 7 years. And it's the largest non-tribal health center in Alaska. We had really close to about 180 employees now, serving about 14,000 patients annually. I need to update my slide. But the reason I say this is that for me, the community health center world is just such an important place. And I think the work that we and all of you do in this space is incredibly important to the patients in our communities. And then when we think about that, our employees and our staff are the most important thing in us being able to carry out and deliver our mission. So with that, when I took over as the CEO in 2015, they had been through several leadership changes, and there was a lot of chaos in the organization. They lost a lot of their providers. And so one of the things I knew right away was that there had to be a lot of attention to the culture and really understanding what was happening within the organization that was causing people to leave and causing us not to be seen as a place where people wanted to come and work. So I spent the first year just kind of listening, understanding what was happening, trying to get a sense of the culture, and then really looking at where we wanted to go into the future. So I wanted to spend that first year just in that space. And the reason I'm kind of telling you this story is that I want you to see the evolution and iteration that we went through as we implemented the employee engagement and satisfaction survey tool that I'm going to talk about. They've had some iterations of this survey, but it was very sporadic. People didn't feel very comfortable with it. There was a lot of negative kind of press, if you will, around it. And so I wanted to make sure that we had a really good alignment and a strategy before we started doing it. So again, looking at engaging the leadership, the C-suite, my executive team really spent a lot of time looking at what do we need to look at, what are the most important things that we want to stay connected to as we look at implementing this new strategy. And so as we looked at it, some of the key factors were, of course, how we were linking what we were doing to the organization's mission, but also looking at productivity, retention, absenteeism, and the ability to recruit and maintain and retain top talent. And then I wanted to make sure that we were had the right intentionality around how we were implementing this and the design, the measurement strategies, that I wanted it to be something that was really purposeful and meaningful and actionable and not just transactional. Because I've seen throughout my career, and I worked in a large health system prior to coming to ANHC, where we roll out the annual engagement and satisfaction survey, collect all the data, few things would happen, and then it'd go on the shelf for until the next year. And so I really wanted to look at a way of doing this in the process that would be meaningful to people. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the survey design and the methodology. So again, kind of helping you get to that place when we get in the presentation where I talk about what were the ways that we responded to some of the data and how it evolved in the over time. So I love this slide because I think when we think about employee satisfaction and engagement, and I just want to clarify that I include engagement along with satisfaction, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second, about how I differentiate those as well as how I connect them. traditionally, I think, most folks think about what's above the iceberg that are more visible things like pay and benefits, work schedule, direct supervisor, the relationship with the supervisor. But I think it's really important to also look underneath that iceberg at some of those much more potent things that are impacting employee satisfaction and engagement. And those are work relationships with each other, the workplace culture, growth potential that employees have, that sense of purpose and mission. And those last two are incredibly important because I don't have to tell you guys this. People come to work in the Community Health Center, FQHC world, because it has a really strong sense of purpose and mission. And so if we're not attentive to that, I think those are some of the places that we can start to slip and lose employee connection. One thing I also wanted to mention is that I think when we talk about employee satisfaction and engagement satisfaction survey, that this is just my opinion, so I'm not speaking for everyone else or any other CEOs, but for me, I felt like it was incredibly important that this was my ownership. Like, not that I did the actual, sending out the link and that sort of thing, but I wanted the organization and all the employees to know that this was monumentally important to me and to my leadership team. And so I know there's some of you in the C-suite that are in this group, and even if you're not, I think it's really important that you have that conversation with your leadership team, because without that, in my opinion, it becomes just another transactional opportunity to collect data. And you might do some things, but without that ownership at the top, the tone from the top really sets, I think, the importance of all of these pieces. So we're talking now just about the methodology. Again, I just wanted to really make sure we were holistically looking at both engagement and satisfaction, looking at what I consider total rewards, what was happening with leadership, learning and development opportunities, and the culture. We wanted to use best practice questions and measurement methodology to produce these results that we wanted to think of as actionable. And one of the things that we did was really looked at the Gallup survey questions. And I'm sure a lot of you've heard, there's always data out from Gallup around employee engagement and satisfaction. And they have about 12 questions that they use to kind of gather that data. They're very expensive, I'll just say that. So we looked at all of those questions, and then from there really determined what our questions would be. And I had the privilege of working with an incredible, my chief communications officer had a really strong background in qualitative and quantitative data, which is kind of funny as a communications officer, but it makes it really great later on when you're trying to visualize the data. And then my chief HR officer was incredibly knowledgeable as well. So what we did was we created two sets of questions, the employee engagement questions, and then we had an annual employee satisfaction questions as well. So what I wanted to do is that traditionally employee engagement and satisfaction, or just that satisfaction, are done annually. But what I had really started wanting to look at was what would happen if we actually looked at employee engagement quarterly, kind of from what I think of as a pulse survey type of process, so that you could really in real time see what was happening in the organization rather than just one time a year. Now, to do that, it definitely takes some more time commitment and resource commitment, but I definitely think it pays off in big ways when you're able to do this. And then the employee satisfaction questions were questions that were much less temporal in nature, meaning that they didn't change that much over the course of a year. So like pay and benefits and some of those types of questions. So I'm going to show you the next few slides of the questions that we came up with for our engagement survey, which was done quarterly, and then I'll share with you the satisfaction questions. But again, I'm not going to go through each of the questions. You can go back and look at some of these questions. Honestly, you feel free to use any of these questions that you want. I mean, there's a lot of work that we did to try to really validate our questions. And now some of the work I'm doing now, my consulting work and coaching work, I'm working with leaders and their teams at how they can use this approach to really look at how they want to improve their organizational culture. So again, feel free to look at and use any of these questions that you may see fit for what you're trying to do. And if there are any questions, please let me know along the way. I know Suzanne and her team are going to try to interrupt me from my continuous chatting if there are any things that come up. But I just wanted to show you this. Again, I'm not going to go through the questions, but probably at a glance, you can start to see and get a feel for what some of the questions look like. The other thing I just want to go back really quickly is say that the little asterisks, those were the original questions that we started with in 2016. And over time, as we got more data, there were a few questions that we added to kind of get a little more nuanced data. Additionally, during COVID, we added some questions to both the annual as well as the quarterly survey. But those fell off as the pandemic kind of wrapped down. And so we did this quarterly, every quarter for the last, 6+ years now. We only missed one quarter, and that was in March of 2020, which all of us know what happened in March of 2020. But I was really proud of the fact that we never let this kind of fall to the wayside, because we knew the value and the importance of keeping this as a consistent offering and for our employees if they knew what was happening. So again, you can kind of see when you have time to look at this yourself, you can see the questions that we added over time versus the original questions that we had. And then again, on an annual basis, we added these additional questions to the engagement survey. So we still did the engagement survey at the same time we did the satisfaction questions. It's just that that was a longer survey with those questions. The other thing that you'll note is that we also started looking at how to enhance the qualitative data that we were getting from the comments that people were sharing. Initially, we just had kind of all of the quantitative questions, and we did it through SurveyMonkey. And then we had a thing at the end that says, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? And what we found after about the first two implementations was, gosh, we got comments, but it was really kind of hard to tell what they may have been related to. And so what we did then was we went back, and so for every, I think, 3 to 5 questions, we created a space for a qualitative response or answer so that people could, give some information while they were going through the survey, rather than waiting to the end to add, just a kind of a generic kind of question. And that really was very important in terms of increasing our comments and really helping us get a lot more clarity around some of the quantitative data. So you can see what some of those additional qualitative questions were that we added to the survey. And again, I would invite you to think about this whole process as an evolution and an iterative process, because you start out in a certain place, and then as you gain more information and insight, it really leads you to this refinement and evolution of how you look at the data. So with that, one of the things that you can probably quickly imagine is we were collecting a lot of data, and I'm a data person. I love data. I love to look at data. And but what was happening with my executive team was that we were looking at all this data, we were looking at all these comments, and we were making changes and responding. But as you can imagine, it's also difficult to figure out, like, where are the priorities? We can't do everything. What are the ways that we can kind of look at that? And so we had been doing that kind of manually, figuring it out. How do we look at what's kind of rising to the surface? What are the things we really need to be attentive to? What are things that we'll just have to say, right now we can't do any of that. But as you can imagine, is a lot of data. And so my team, the executive team, again, would feel a little overwhelmed. And then we would share it down through our directors and management and supervisors, kind of through that cascade chain, if you will. And then to the employees, there were, kind of messages and pieces of it that we would share. We didn't, share all of the thousands of pieces of data. But again, as we collected more, we felt like we needed a better way of looking at it so that we could create some simplicity from it. So that led us to, and this has just happened in the last year and a half, and was starting when I left. And I have the privilege of still working with them, the Chief Human Resource Officer and the Chief Communications Officer, in kind of refining some of this next step process. So what the decision was to look at how can we take all this data and create what we call index or indices of the quantitative data. And we did a similar piece around the qualitative data, which I'll explain in just a second. But, after collecting all this data over all this time, watching 29 trend lines is like, woof, even data geeks are like, that's too much. And so what we decided was to create this group to look at the questions and group them and kind of collapse them into particular data points or indices so that we could look at the data in a much more meaningful way, as well as creating those right metrics that people would be more able to know if we were changing or influencing. So what we came up with was this final 5 index categories. And I just want to pull a full disclaimer. This is not like an academic qualitative study where we did all this rigor and looking at things. But what we did do was really create this opportunity to say, how do we want this data to be reflected as a leadership team so that we can have actionability around this data, because it's so rich and there's so much here. So we want to make it in a way that really aligns with our core mission and our values and who we are as an organization and how we're serving our employees. So all of that said, these are the 5 categories or the indices that we created to then collapse the different data points into. So 1 is we're doing a great job at ANHC. 2 was I feel good about my general work life at ANHC. 3, I have a positive working relationship with ANHC leaders. 4, I see a future growth for me at ANHC, and I have my basic needs met. And again, this is not based on a scientific rigor, but what we wanted to know was that what was the most important to us as leaders that we wanted to make sure we had in our front view mirror that we were watching and being attentive to. So your eyes probably hurt here. Sorry about that. The other thing I want to mention is that all the data that I'm going to be showing you is really what I call placeholder data, because I didn't really, obviously wasn't going to use, their data for sure. But I think it's important for you to see what it looks like when you look at all of this data. But you can see, whew, this is, like I said, even for data geeks, this is a lot to look at and to really kind of understand how to manage, and then most importantly, how do you prioritize this? And as we got more and more data, it became more difficult. And so, and not only with the quantitative pieces, but then also with all the qualitative pieces, because we had done a really good job of encouraging our employees to share their qualitative comments as well. So afterwards, see, this is much better and much cleaner to look at, right? So you can now see where those trend lines are, and you can really start to, dive in. And what I really love about the quarterly data, the collection approach is that, let's say you looked at, quarter 3 in March of 2021, and let's say it went down quite a bit from, the prior quarter. What you can do when you have more of that real-time way that you're doing this is you can kind of go back and you can look at, like, wow, what was happening then? Was there something that happened? Did we lose staff? And then we go, oh, that's when we started implementing Epic, or oh, that's when we changed the front desk check-in, or whatever those pieces are around change management. It also allows you this window into really understanding how things that maybe as a leadership team, you're like, oh, yeah, we did that great. Everything went well. But then when you look at the data, you're like, oh, gosh, we missed something here. And so I invite you to think about this data as a living, breathing partner in your work to really look at culture and organizational growth, but also the kind of culture that you're trying to create. I have found it as a great tool. So I'm going to stop there for just a second and see if anybody has any questions before I kind of go into this next section. And if not, that's no problem either. Okay, and if you do, certainly feel free to just jump in or put something in the chat, and they'll let me know. I think one of the most important pieces that you can the mantra that you can maintain when you're doing this is consistency. And I looked at some of your earlier responses in some of your earlier sessions where some of you had said that you had kind of sporadic ways of doing it. You know, maybe it's important this year, maybe it's not next year. So I would invite you, before you really engage in the full go forth, is to really make that commitment to it being a consistent process. And these are the 4 steps that we utilized in terms of really keeping us kind of in that track. So collect the data, visualize the data, review, and then act. So the key goals for this survey process, again, for us and how we use the data, was reliably follow through on timing for the quarterly and annual survey, so that you create this expectation and routinization with your employees that they go, okay, it's March, we're getting ready for our employee engagement survey. It's September, it's our employee engagement and satisfaction survey time. So that consistency makes a huge difference in how that works. So looking at trends over time. So this is just another way to visualize, collect, visualize, review, communicate, implement. I just looked at my time, so I'm going to try to speed up a little bit here, but you can go back and look at some of this, but we had it over a 2-week period of time. The data was collected first and de-identified, compiled by our Chief HR Officer in Communications. They put it into a visual format, and then brought all of that into a space where the CEO and the other senior leader teams could look at it. This was kind of our process for data compilation and visualization based on our comments. So we looked at total comments. These are just the ways that we coded the qualitative data. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to get to some of the other pieces before I run out of time. But you have all this information. But this is the way it was visualized. You look at the trend data, and then underneath we have the qualitative data and what that looks like from the different fields that we selected to code the qualitative data. I know it's a lot, so I apologize for trying to dump a lot of information on you, but I'm hopeful that when you go back and look at this, you know, you can make some sense out of this. And if not, you can certainly reach out to me. And again, this was just the way that we displayed the themes and the suggestions. And then we also had a section on compliments. What were the positive things that came out, so that we could also be in that space of feeling good about some of the things that we saw happen that were positive. And then it went through this review process with the CEO, the C-suite, and then down through all of the different levels of management. And then we had several employee-based committees. We have a well-being committee as well as an employee satisfaction or employee engagement committee as well. So the most critical process is the act. So communicate and implement. If you spend too much time thinking about a thing, you'll never get it done. So I think that's one of the things that we often do with data is we ruminate over it, we run through it, we maneuver it, but really it's how do we get to action? Speed to action is what I think of as the most important. So in the outcomes for review, when there's this, the senior leaders are looking at things, one of the most important pieces is at that senior level executive team, that there is collective leadership buy-in into the areas of need and next steps. This can go south really fast if you don't have that, that consensus among the executive team that this is important and that everybody has an ownership in this, not just for their area, but for the whole organization. So that is really incredibly important that that takes place at the top.
Tammy, can I ask a question?
Yes.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would just, personally, and maybe somebody would be thinking about this too, but how would you recommend helping to get that collective leadership buy-in, right? If you have somebody, if you had somebody who wasn't really on board, and how did you create that cohesiveness to sort of that buy-in, if you will?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. And, I would say that that question, or the answer to that question, is deeper in terms of the leadership role, that if you have an executive team that is not cohesive to start with, you're going to have a lot of challenges. So I would encourage, and some of the work I'm doing now with CEOs is and their teams, is I'm using the model, the five, it's called the 5 dysfunctions of team, but I've reframed it as the 5 behaviors of high performing teams by Patrick Lencioni. And it's a great model if you've not ever looked at it, but it talks about what's at the base of really a high functioning team, which is trust. And then there's being able to be in conflict with one another, commitment, outcomes at the top. But I think, to summarize a simple answer to that is, as the leader, the CEO of the organization, I think it's your responsibility and your ownership to create that why for your team to understand the importance of this data and their role in this. And then if there is if there are outliers, and I'm working with an executive team right now that we have a couple outliers who just feel like, this is too much and people just complain and there's nothing we can do. And so, helping people really understand that when you are in a senior leadership role, this is again my opinion, it is your responsibility and obligation and ownership to look at everything collectively for the whole organization, not just in your area, but in the whole organization. And so I think that's where it's incumbent upon the CEO to really set that stage and create that invitation for all of their senior leaders to be bought into what they need to do as a collective. But that is, to me, that will either make or break the efficacy of what you're trying to do. Thanks for that.
Thank you so much.
And then once you have that and you've really created that really clear approach to it, and you're looking at these new data indices and the comment themes, then you can start to share that information with the leaders down from the senior suite into the broader employee population. And that's where you'll have to kind of figure out within your own organization what kind of ways that you think your employees and staff really want to receive and hear some of the information, and most importantly, what the action items are around that. So this is some of the ways that we did it and that they continue to do it, and some of the ways that I share with some of my clients I'm working with now is really having a review. If you have any all staff training events, really using some of this at the beginning of events and really highlighting some of the things that have happened, some of the action items that the organization has taken to really maybe alleviate some of the challenges or things that have come up in some of the data. Include the data in a staff. We had what we called a staff hot sheet. It was a weekly email that went out to all staff, kind of giving them the highlights for the week and things that they could be looking for. And so we shared that data in the hot sheet over a period of time. We put different pieces in it. So again, ways to really get it in front of people so that they can see it and that they can digest it in those kind of bite-sized pieces. I did lots of CEO town halls prior to COVID. I did a lot of them in person, and then after COVID, it actually became more a broader reach for reaching people in different places with Zoom, and so that was really effective. And then one of the things we did that really made a difference was we asked our managers to check in with their direct reports for additional insights on the results and really try to gather some of that real-time frontline information around what their staff, think about what's happening. So again, acting on the information, again, this is really important, is being consistent and really making sure that you're getting action where it needs to happen. So I just want to wrap up with, more importantly, some of the wisdom and some of the things that I hope will be helpful to you to kind of put in your front view mirror as you think about what you can do with your data and where you might want to go with it. So these were some of the key things that came out of our data over the years of doing this work. We kept hearing that people needed more leadership training and understanding of that. So we created an Emerging Leadership Academy. We restructured our annual review process, for performance review to include additional feedback and development components. We hired a security guard and upgraded our organizational safety tool and infrastructure when we heard that people didn't feel safe and that there were things that they felt challenged around. We formed multiple employee-led committees. We had service excellence, well-being, and then initiated several all-staff events and traditions. And you can see some of them where we have a spirit week and a gratitude week. That gratitude week was one of our most biggest highlights for sure. We had holiday-based events, including the ANHC Giving Tree. So those were some of the things that we that came out of the data and things that we learned from the data, both from the quantitative as well as the qualitative. We also just looked at the comments and understood how we could use the comments over time. And then, like I said earlier, we had updated the survey format to make sure that we had more allowance for open field comments, and that really, really enhanced our ability to get more kind of nuanced information than just the quantitative data. And so the more comments we received, the more insight we gained, and then the comments also gave this larger context to the quantitative data. So the other piece that I would really say that we learned is that it's not always easy to receive feedback. And one thing I would always say to my team is, look, if we, when people would complain like, oh, there's just people complaining or they're just not happy, getting feedback is always, it's not pleasant sometimes, especially if it's feedback that really impacts what we're doing as leaders. But I always felt like that it was important for our leadership to understand that if we're asking people to do this, then it is our responsibility and accountability to take this feedback and to try to receive it in the most meaningful and receptive way possible, and not to get defensive and start to rationalize or to say, discount the data. So that to me is really, really important, how you're able to set your leadership team up to receive the data. Making sure that you remain in a creative versus a reactive space of consideration when you're looking at their feedback. It's our natural human tendency to go, oof, that's not true, or rationalize it, and just take deep breaths and really look at it as, wow, this is interesting. I'd like to learn more about where that comment or that piece of data is coming from. It's not easy, but over time, when you start to do it more regularly, you can see how that starts to influence what's happening in the organization, and hopefully see it as a gift. And employees want to know that they were heard. They told us they really wanted to know and hear back on some of the things that we were finding. And our first kind of year or two, we weren't really very good at that. We were trying to figure out like what to do with all that. But over time, we became better at that. And we also had a lot more kind of 360 feedback with our employees to say, does this help? Does this make sense? In terms of how we're giving you back the information of what we've done. Because as most of you know, employees want to know that they've been seen and heard, and especially when they've taken their own time, not their own time, but time to fill out the tool, the survey, and provide feedback. We also did a lot of feedback in the CEO town halls. Would have, like, I would ask people, before the town hall, they could send in questions and things that they wanted to hear about. And then I really made a gallant effort to answer all of those questions in the town halls when we were talking about the data. So the other piece that I think really became important was setting goals. So, when we did it quarterly, at first we tried to set quarterly goals, but that was too much. It was like, whoa, that's just, you can't do that. So, over time, we realized that kind of some of those more annual goals were better. And then we looked at some of the, like maybe like it was a 6-month goal instead of, every time we did it every 3 months. So you'll find what will be your right cadence for the time frame and for the goals that you're going to be setting. And that's where the indices really, I think, are going to be really helpful in terms of helping prioritize and look at what those goals and measurements might be for success. So wrapping up, these are just some of the things that I would ask you to take away and reflect on as you go back to your health center with your great information with this learning collaborative and all the things that you're learning through this. Is the first question I would ask is, are you measuring for confirmation or measuring with genuine curiosity? And I say that in a very loving and kind way, because sometimes, we do things for compliance reasons, and that's important. But if you're measuring to just really kind of check a box or to gather information and be able to speak to it generically, I would encourage you not to do that. But if you're measuring it with that genuine sense of improving what's happening, oh my gosh, my dogs, can you guys hear them? I'm so sorry.
He's excited.
There's somebody's coming every week and doing some stuff in my yard, so I apologize. But anyway, the other questions are, what challenges do you think could come up in the event when you receive this feedback that might be critical? And then how can you proactively prepare your teams, not only at the C-suite level, but all the management levels underneath, because it really is an important tool for all of management. And then how do you think your staff would prefer to hear about the survey outcomes? What would the follow-up action with that be? What are existing organizational communication pathways or ways that you already share information that you could share these results? So those are just some things I would ask you to reflect on as you go back and look at some of this data. So now I'm going to have, if you have any questions, I'm happy to take some questions before I turn it back over to Suzanne.
I had a question. Several slides back further, you had a comment, something about answering every comment or question, and it said something at the end of it, said even if the answer is no. So I'm not sure which slide that was, but I was curious as to, how do you our center has, and when I look at the open-ended comments that were in our survey, I heard you say, you want to do things like utilizing some of the information sharing some of the information in all staff meetings, or sharing the information in pieces in your different weekly newsletters and that sort of thing. And even, I guess, you could share things on a department level if something was specific to a department or whatever. But one of the things that we tend to do is like look at the 5 most common answers or something rather than looking at some of the things that may be not everybody has the same skill set, so some people may not be
yes
things that don't go up to the top 5 most common things. So how do you go about answering?
Yes, I think I know what you're saying. You're saying, and thanks for that clarification. Definitely not sharing like all of the information without question. And so that's where it's really the opportunity to figure out what are those most salient pieces. So as you go through, and like we did, where we had different themes, we had suggestions and things like that. We, as an executive team, chose what are the ones that we want to be able to focus on. And then we would share with the employees, these are the things that we heard you say. These are the things that we are committed to working on over this period of time. And to your point, you really have to make it, you can't, you'll overwhelm people if you give them way too much information, right? So we had a way that we would display kind of the trends of the quantitative data and kind of where we were. But then with some of the action items, it was very specific to those things that we felt like as an executive team were the most salient and the most important, so that employees knew that we heard what they were saying and here's what we were doing. Or in some cases we had to say, we heard you, at this point in time, that's not something we're able to undertake, and here's why. So that to me was even as important as saying what we are doing is to be able to say, thank you, we heard you. Right now, we can't do that. We can, revisit that in a year or whatever the pieces were. And that way you're being transparent too, because in reality, there's no way you can do everything that people are suggesting. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I know it's a lot of information.
Tammy, I had a question. So I know that you said that you started a leadership academy. What type of positions did you start with in the academy, and then maybe what did you expand it to, or was it just one thing that you started with and that's how it landed?
Yeah, it also has had an iteration as well. We started initially by looking at like all the leaders that were like managers and supervisors, just trying to do initially we tried to do a mix of really true leadership development skills, along with some of the things that our chief HR officer felt like they should know as leaders, in terms of FMLA,
Mm-hmm.
some of those more kind of compliance things. And that worked okay, but what we found was we didn't always have the best attendance, and people weren't always committed. And so we kind of stopped that. I went back to the leadership team and said, hey, this is really important. I really want to put some time into figuring out what this would look like. And so what we did was we created a different type of leadership academy where we had the leaders that were interested and wanted to grow their own leadership skills. We asked them to apply to that academy. We asked their supervisor to sponsor and sign off that they would be committed to attending X amount of meetings, and if they missed, we wanted to make it more of an opt-in and really give some weight to it, if you will, because what we found was we just kind of opened it up and just did this general thing. I call them the looky-loos. Like some people show up at some meetings, some people come to another meeting, and we couldn't get this really cohort-based approach. And so we changed it to that much more formalized approach. We had a smaller group, but we also have more committed people, and it was much more effective when you look at kind of a cohort type of delivery. It still had components of leadership and self-development and growth, along with some of those more compliance driven pieces like FMLA and worker, some of the things that HR really wanted to make sure that leaders knew and understood, discipline or, corrective action, all of those kind of things. But predominantly it really was a leadership development piece. And it also put the onus on the C-suite leader that was the person sponsoring them, so that if the leader wasn't coming to those sessions, they would go back to the leader and say, hey, Tammy hasn't been attending. Is there something going on? Can you help us make sure she's still in this space? So that was one of the pieces. Again, it was an iteration of that.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much.
All right. Well,
Any other questions?
Oh, yeah. If not, I'll turn it back over to Suzanne. Thank you guys so much for listening. I so apologize for my dogs going crazy. I hope there's forgiveness there and a little bit of grace, but thank you. And if you have any questions or anything, don't hesitate to reach out to me. But thank you.
Awesome.
I appreciate the time.
And Tammy, thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experiences with a cohort. I obviously learned a lot. I've had a couple questions, but just really just wonderful to hear the approach that was taken at ANHC and how it evolved over time. And I know that most of our cohort has been doing or has done at least one staff satisfaction survey in the past. So really insightful to hear about how it evolved over time and how you took what was working and what wasn't working, and then just how that evolved over time. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your insight and your wisdom with us. All right, so before we wrap up for today, we're just going to go quickly over the homework here in the last few minutes. So what we're going to be doing for this homework assignment is to creating an action plan for responding to your staff satisfaction survey. So we're going to be thinking about our action planning process in a few ways. So discussion, prioritization, planning, and then review. So this could be something that you have done before, and so you can just sort of write it down, and maybe you want to write it down if you've done it before, and then think about maybe what you want to do differently. Or if you haven't responded to something before and you've just done your first survey, then you can think about what you want to do and what your next steps are. So really developing that action plan for responding to your staff satisfaction survey. And of course, as always, we'll give you all some time to talk about it with your peers at our next session here. And so again, this just really shows what it looks like, the task, the name, the role, how you're going to respond to it, the timeline, which is always really important, and also notes. So making sure that it has, the task has someone that's assigned to it, and how they're going to do it, and also that timeline is really important. And if there's something else that you want to add to this sheet that isn't in there, feel free to do that as well. This is, make it your own and make it work as best you can for your organization, since we're all different. All right, and just a reminder about how you access the discussion board to access the recording, the slides, as well as the homework. So you log on to the discussion board here and then go into the implementing and responding to staff satisfaction learning collaborative there. And if you're having any trouble, feel free to contact Mariah if you've lost your login or whatever, and she'll be more than happy to get that back to you. So, all right. So with that, we have finished 2 out of our 4 sessions for our staff satisfaction surveys, learning collaborative. And so next time, we're going to be talking about some other ways to think about getting input in regards to staff satisfaction at your health center. And that is going to take place on November 1st from 2 to 3:15 Eastern. And then our final one will be on November 15th from 2 to 3:15 Eastern. And then as we wrap up, as always, feel free to ask us questions. You can go on to the discussion board and ask the cohort questions. And again, thank you so much to everyone for participating today, and to Tammy for being our guest presenter, and of course the team at the Star Center, Mariah and Helen, for being with us as well. So thanks again. Have a wonderful afternoon. Fill out the evaluation that's getting ready to pop up on your screen, and we look forward to seeing you next time, and have a great afternoon.